Deputy Chief Environment and Sustainable Development Officer, Ms. Samantha Justin, the Department of Sustainable Development colleagues, IUCN colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to this validation session for the final ABS and biodiversity policies. I failed to introduce myself. Hello everybody, my name is Bina Joseph. I am the National Project Coordinator for this ABS project. It's a very long name, but we'll say it together. Strengthening access and benefit sharing policies and institutional frameworks through demonstrable models in St. Lucia project. And we will continue with our agenda. I will now invite our Deputy Permanent Secretary, Mr. Chris Satney, to deliver the opening remarks.
A pleasant good morning to one and all. Let me just acknowledge the Chief Sustainable Development and Environment Officer, that is Mrs. Dawn Pierre Nathaniel, who is joining us online. Let me also acknowledge the Deputy Chief Sustainable Development and Environment Officer, Ms. Sam Justin, as well as representatives of the National Biodiversity Coordinating Committee, the NBCC, and representatives from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I would want to think that it's a wonderful morning in St. Lucia, so welcome to these proceedings. On behalf of the Department of Sustainable Development, the Biodiversity Focal Point, and IUCN as the executing agency, I am pleased to welcome you to today's validation session for the final draft National Biodiversity Policy and the Access and Benefit Sharing ABS policy developed under the Strengthening Access and Benefit Sharing ABS policies and institutional frameworks through demonstrable models in St. Lucia project. Today's session marks an important milestone, a significant step towards strengthening St. Lucia's policy or policy framework for biodiversity management. We are here to review and endorse two key policy instruments. One, the National Biodiversity Policy, which provides the overarching framework for biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits consistent with the three objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, and two, the ABS policy, which will guide access to genetic resources and ensure the fair and equitable sharing of benefits, arising from their use, consistent with the third objective of the CBD. Together, these policies not only support St. Lucia's commitment under the Convention on Biological Diversity, but also under the Nagoya Protocol, while advancing national priorities for sustainable development. They have been developed under Component 1 of the ABS project with the support of our legal consultant, Legal and Drafting Services Limited, led by Ms. Barbara Vargas, and the able coordination of Ms. Bina Joseph, our National Project Coordinator. Over the past months, this process has benefited from extensive stakeholder consultation and draft validation sessions. Following these engagements, the consultant has produced final draft documents for your consideration. Today, folks, we seek your formal endorsement of these policies. This represents the final stage prior to submission to the Cabinet of Ministers. So this really shows how important your participation at this session is to the achievement of the ABS, final ABS and biodiversity policies. At this stage, we encourage you to be focused and to give substantive input. The intention is not to revisit or reframe the policies that all of you have agreed upon, but to confirm that they accurately reflect prior discussion and are ready for endorsement. I thank the IUCN, the Department of Sustainable Development, the ABS Projects team, and the National Biodiversity Coordinating Committee, and all partners for their valuable contribution to this process. With this, I want to welcome you and wish you a productive session and continued collaboration as we forge ahead. I thank you.
I am pleased to see the range of persons or stakeholders in the room today. We have stakeholders from the private sector, from the public sector, and so we are very grateful that you have taken time out of your busy schedules. I know, Mr. Bernard, you have a very busy schedule. So thank you so much for taking time out to be with us today. So at this moment, I will provide you with a brief overview of the project, as well as why we are here today. On your desk, or on your tables, I should say, you would find the agenda. You'll also find a fact sheet about the project. You will also find on your table a policy. On alternative tables, you will find a biodiversity policy. You would also find an ABS policy. So feel free to review those policies. And Ms. Vargas will continue after me. Ms. Vargas will then present on the biodiversity policy. So the strengthening access and benefit sharing policies and institutional frameworks through demonstrable model in St. Lucia project, also known as the ABS project, its objective is to create an enabling environment for the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol in St. Lucia. And I will speak to the Nagoya Protocol in a while. But the purpose here today is to present the final draft ABS policies, access and benefit sharing policy, as well as the national biodiversity policy. We will highlight key elements and changes made after our validation session on March 20th, our draft validation session on March 20th. And we'll also seek formal endorsement from agencies, and Mr. Satney also spoke on that. And this endorsement will confirm our readiness for cabinet submission. So as I said before, the objective of this project is really to create that enabling environment for the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol in St. Lucia. And we're doing that with an institutional and harmonized approach, institutional and intersectoral, as well as we want to demonstrate certain models to test the operationalization of ABS in St. Lucia. The project's duration, it started in 2023. Unfortunately, implementation really started in 2025, and it is aimed to end next year. Our project costing is about $1.5 million, funded by the Global Environment Facility, GEF, implemented by UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, and executed a joint execution with IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, which is where I work, as well as with our national agency, our national focal point for biodiversity and ABS in St. Lucia, the Department of Sustainable Development. So I will touch on the Nagoya Protocol for those who are not familiar with it. The Nagoya Protocol is a treaty found under the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD. It was implemented to ensure that there is access to genetic resources in a country, but to also acknowledge that the state owns the genetic resources of each country. So there is sovereignty with regards to genetic resources in a country. And when we talk about genetic resources, we're talking about plants, animals, microorganisms within the country. So anything that has some hereditary material, that's what we refer to as genetic resources. So this protocol focuses on access, ensuring that there is access to those genetic resources for research and development. However, in exchange for that, the country or the state will receive a fair and equitable share of any benefits arising from the use of that particular genetic resource. And it could be monetary as well as non-monetary, because there are certain organizations outside who would come to just do research. What are we getting in return? And that's what this protocol seeks to establish in countries who have signed onto it. And St. Lucia signed onto it in 2022. We ratified it in 2022. It also puts a value on traditional knowledge. What does traditional knowledge mean? It means the knowledge or the associate knowledge with the genetic resource. The traditional knowledge associated with the genetic resource. We're talking about medicine, we're talking about recipes, things that we in St. Lucia, you cannot find it anywhere else in the world. We are the ones who do it, and it is very valuable to us. So this protocol puts a value on that, and it also encourages states to establish a legal framework. Ensure that you have legislation, ensure that you have what you call mutually agreed terms and prior informed consent documents. These mutually agreed terms will then define what is the access, what are the benefits that the country is receiving. And benefits can range from scholarships to monetary percentages of their profits. It could also talk about equipment, transfer of technology, transfer of knowledge. There are so many things that we can benefit from. And the thing is, St. Lucia is home to a lot of biodiversity. It is a biodiversity-rich nation. And there are things we have not discovered as yet. And so this protocol puts in place those checks and balances to ensure that we don't get the short end of the stick, but we are in charge of our genetic resources, and we ensure that we get benefits if anybody else uses those genetic resources. I do need to inform you that there is another treaty, the ITPGRFA. Basically it says it focuses on food and agriculture. So anything that is not food and agriculture would fall under the Nagoya Protocol. I think I've spoken about that, but it's basically the benefits. With this, not only that we get fair and equitable share of benefits arising from the use, but that's also a way to incentivize individuals, citizens, to conserve their biodiversity, knowing that there's a value in it. Not just an ecological value, but also an economical value. Knowing that it incentivizes persons to conserve biodiversity. It also helps boost biotechnology, not only in St. Lucia, but around the world, and supports local communities. So the project consists of four components, apologies. The first component is strengthening our legal and institutional frameworks. Then our second component is to develop an effective permitting and monitoring framework, and this will deal with ensuring there's checks and balances, providing persons with permits, and ensuring that on a public, there is a public platform, what you call a clearinghouse mechanism, that anybody from any country in the world can see who is using certain genetic resources, and that also helps us monitor who and also helps us with compliance. Component 3, to establish some demonstrable models, and we are focused on 2 genetic resources, the Lucia tree, also known as the incense tree in St. Lucia, and our St. Lucia viper, our venomous snake, the Fudilus. And component 4, we focus on knowledge management, ensuring that there is complete buy-in from the stakeholders, not just from our public sector, our private sector, but also from our communities. So component 1, which is what we're focused on today, our outputs consist of the access and benefit sharing policy, biodiversity policy, the access and benefit sharing legislation that will be incorporated into the Biodiversity, Sustainable Use and Conservation Bill, and also development of an operational framework and management recommendations for the administration of the ABS framework in St. Lucia. So today we're focused on those two policies, the access and benefit sharing policy as well as the biodiversity policy. And this has been a structured and consultative process with our consultant, Ms. Barbara Vargas. And today represents the final stage of stakeholder validation. Basically, the purpose here today is to confirm that the policies are ready and to move forward for endorsement. So the biodiversity policy just is an overarching framework, as Mr. Sakni referred or spoke about. It also guides biodiversity governance in St. Lucia, supports CBD objectives, and informs future policies. We need to also recognize that this policy is high level and it will inform other policies, not only the ABS, but conservation policy and sustainable use policy in the years to come. The ABS policy will define your operational framework, define access systems, establish benefit sharing, as well as guides legislation. We also need to know within those policies that it is somewhat high level as well. We intend that some of the operational frameworks or the details for operationalization of ABS in St. Lucia will come in either the regulations or administrative documents. So your role here today, and I think I've said it often, to confirm the agreement with the policies that we have presented to you, raise only critical issues if there are any, because we are at the point where it is almost finalized, and to provide formal endorsement from your organization or your agency. So now I will move into the presentation of the National Biodiversity Policy, and I invite Ms. Barbara Vargas, who is online with us, to present the key elements of the policy. Ms. Vargas?
Thank you, Ms. Joseph. Good morning again, participants. Let me, Ms. Joseph, Mr. Forrester, can you facilitate my sharing the presentation?
So, the Biodiversity Overarching Policy 2026. This policy is designed as a high-level framework, not a detailed operational document. Therefore, it provides direction and key principles, not only for the ABS, but also for the other objectives of the CBD. So the policy aligns with all three pillars of the Convention on Biological Diversity, namely conservation, sustainable use, and fair and equitable benefit sharing. I have listed some of the key guiding principles that are in the policy. These principles guide the overall approach to biodiversity governance, including conservation, sustainable use, and equitable outcomes within a coordinated national framework. So let's turn now to the comments received and how they were addressed. First, I'll briefly explain the approach taken in reviewing the comments. All comments from the consultation and validation process were reviewed in the context of the policy framework and the broader biodiversity system. The comments generally fell into two categories. Some comments were outside the scope of the policy, meaning that they were not particularly about biodiversity, the three pillars that policy is supposed to cover, and those addressed at the appropriate level within the framework. The focus was therefore on maintaining a coherent structure with targeted refinements where clarification was needed. So to be clear, matters that are considered outside of the policy, they're not omitted. It's not that they were not important. They're important, but they're not omitted. They are addressed within the appropriate policy or legal framework. The approach taken ensures that each issue is allocated to the level where it can be most effectively implemented, whether at policy, legislative, or administrative level. This slide highlights the types of comments we received and how they were addressed. In relation to institutional clarity, the policy language was refined to improve understanding while maintaining flexibility at the policy level. For national context, the framing was strengthened in the introduction to better reflect St. Lucia's realities. And in relation to scope, the policy was aligned more clearly and with its role as an overarching framework, with operational detail addressed through specific policies and legislation. So there are two characteristics we want the policy to reflect. One, we don't want it to be too prescriptive, because you cannot have, remember the policy setting the direction. So if it is too prescriptive, one can only consider current circumstances when drafting a policy. And so as circumstances change, if the policy is written at too detailed a level, assuming current circumstances, and these circumstances change, then the policy is not useful, it's not flexible to give you direction. The other characteristic we want to ensure the policy reflects, and that's in relation to both policies, we don't want it to be time-bound, because that means the policy gets obsolete very quickly and we have to spend a lot of resources trying to update it. Time-bound meaning where we have references to either current circumstances and language about this current state of things, where we will say, well, this is not currently the case, but we will be doing something. And so we guarded against both these things, making the policy time-bound and making it too prescriptive. We guarded against that, especially for the overarching policy, but also for the ABS policy, which is also at a particular level. So that's the context in which we say we have norms and we have language, but it is very important where they appear, at what level, whether it's at policy level, legislative level, or the operational administrative level. Now, I want to focus on one of the important comments, and that is in relation to the national context. This comment related to the need for stronger national context and clearer institutional linkages. In response, the introduction was strengthened to better reflect St. Lucia's national realities and the role of biodiversity across sectors. Being careful, again, not to be too prescriptive and not to be too time-bound. And so something like exactly the current circumstances of St. Lucia, some of the details, the policy reflects St. Lucia national realities without getting into too much detail. The policy also recognizes, in relation to the linkages, it also recognizes key national instruments and coordinating mechanisms including the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. That is a key document, and the national coordinating structures. You will notice the policy refers to national coordinating structures. The action plan actually has specific entities like the coordinating committee, National Biodiversity Coordinating Committee, but that is not specifically mentioned. Again, this is really for the ideal level of reference and flexibility that we need in the policy. The best way to refer to that is national coordination structures, and we refer directly to the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, where more information is given on those structures. So we have both. We have the reference, but the reference is made at a level that allows the policy to be flexible, but also directs the reader, where the more detailed information is. Remember too that the purpose of this policy is to get cabinet approval. So we already have approval in relation to the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan and its contents. And so the coordinating committee, as part of the action plan, already has cabinet approval. And so the not specifically mentioning the coordinating committee is not fatal, because the purpose of the whole content of the policy is to get approval for the content, and the coordinating committee already has approval. We also mention that the policy is aligned with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and its 2030 agenda. As a matter of fact, we have found, with the very able support of the project coordinator, Ms. Joseph, that we could strengthen the reference to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and in particular its 2030 agenda. So we are proposing a refinement of our reference to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework this morning. We have it written out here so you can see exactly what we're considering. It's just a refinement of one of the paragraphs to show that St. Lucia's biodiversity framework is intended to be aligned with the 2030 goals. So these changes will, or this, our response to the national context and the linkages comments ensures that the policy is both nationally grounded and aligned with international commitments. So I really value those comments relating to national context, because I feel it assisted in, making the policy more grounded. So this is the additional clarification where we had already referred to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, but we hadn't referred to the targets. We had referred to the 2030 as the timeline by which the policy should be reviewed, but we didn't make the connection very clear that we were operating within the target. So we are proposing for one of the bullet points in section 1.3 that we make that clearer by this language, part of which is already there. So we're just including the reference to the 2030 target. So it will now say, the policy is aligned with the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, including its 2030 targets, and supports implementation through national instruments such as the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, including its national coordinating mechanisms. So this is the level we think we should refer to the coordinating committee as national coordinating mechanisms within the action plan. So if for some reason later on one changes the action plan, renames the committee, or has subcommittees, or just changes the administrative framework, one can simply change the plan. You don't have to also go to, the the biodiversity policy and change that. So you don't have this domino effect. So this is the best way to cross-reference, the more detailed aspects of the framework. We do it in a way that if we make one change, it doesn't result in a domino effect and having to change several policies. So this framing, this refinement of that paragraph will clarify the policy's alignment with international frameworks and its implementation through national instruments and coordinating mechanisms.